Good afternoon. My name is Troy Kilpatrick. I'm the Executive Director here at the Journey Museum and Learning Center. And the program you're about to watch was actually recorded on June 8th, 2022, and is titled Community Healing. One of the things that we discussed in great detail within our team here and amongst our education committee was the idea of marking the 50th needed to also provide some community healing and resolution as to this event as it transpired 50 years ago. Often the people who survived were not really listened to as closely as we looked at the lives lost, which is obviously significant too. But we wanted to start to begin to address this in a little bit better fashion by inviting and engaging our community and all audiences in telling their story. So what you're about to see is Velma Kilsback came to us and she volunteered to lead this discussion off. But after her, the speakers that came forward in this program today, they were unknown to us, completely by surprise, not scripted, anything like that. And I think what you're going to see and hear is a lot of healing. And I'd like to, at this point too, encourage everyone who's watching this video that if you have a story to share, Rapid City Public Library is still doing oral history reports, or you can write out your story of your experiences, and no experience is too small in terms of what happened here in 1972. So many people who were within this community who are on the edges of all of this maybe have felt minimalized in terms of their memories and experience, but we all know that for our mental sake, even the idea of PTSD, discussing these types of things and bringing forward your emotions is a positive step in terms of healing yourself from an experience that's negative. So we please hope that you understand the motivation of this program and appreciate where we're going here and trying to heal our community as we remembered and honored and commemorated the events that surrounded the 1972 flood. Thank you for watching this, and thank you for your support.
All right. Thank you. Wopila. Hayami Jakwe Pitona Yahipi, and Iuha Chante Washtea, Napeo Choose Papi. All my family and relatives, it is good to see all of you. And I shake each and every one of you, your hand from my heart. I was very happy to be asked to come. And I know Brian Highhorse. I know him really good. And so I thought, okay, he's going to go first. He's going to go first, I said. And then I'm going to go next. So, and here I am. Brian's not here. For those of you that know Brian, tell him I'm after him. But my name is Velma Kilsback. My Lakota name is Pakeskami, a Shaw woman. My mother's name is Emily Blackbull Kilsma. She comes from the great grandfather. His name was Chief Blackbull. He came from Canada, Moose Jaw, a place called Wood Mountain, that we were able to go and visit that place about 5 or 6 years ago, and before the pandemic. I learned a lot up there. And now today, a part of his regalia is here at the Journey Museum. And there is still more artifacts coming in from Zurich, Germany. This is aside from the flood, and I'm going to get back into the flood of 72. But I'm just going over, where I come from, so that you would know why I'm here. And so in April 23rd of this year, 2 months ago, I had a phone call from a woman by the name of Karen Hoffman, and she was from Warsaw. She was frantically looking for relatives of Chief Blackbull. I am the only surviving from the Blackbull family. I have nephews that are here. They're all Black Bulls too. But from our family, I'm the only one. I'm like Mr. Yellowhawk. I'm the only one. And so I, they got a hold of me, and they told me that they found some artifacts that belonged to my great-great-grandfather. You see, back in those days, they went across to do some shows, and they were a part of the show that went a day, and they usually cross over in a big ship. I remember my mother telling me how they used to tie themselves to their trunks. They would tie ropes around their waist and to their trunks, because inside those trunks were their regalias. And that ship would go back and forth. And so she said that her grandpa would tell them that if that ship shifted from side to side, they would slide all over with their trunks. They didn't want their trunks to get wet because their regalia was inside. And they made it. And they went to all these shows. Well, my grandfather, my great-great-grandfather, left his regalia. Since he was a chief, he has his big war bonnet and also his big trailer. See, my grandfather was a tall man. They wrote about him, and if you get a hold of that book, his name, the book is called They Have Survived by Ron Papandre. And there's a picture of him there, a very tall man. And so I have nephews that are very tall. The tallest one in our family is 6'6", very tall. I have a great-granddaughter sitting in here who is in her first grade, and they said she could pass as a third grader. She's very tall. Can you stand up, Boo-boo? Yeah, she's a very tall girl. And so, so she got a hold of me, and she was very afraid that it was the start of the Ukraine, and she thought that the Russians were going to bomb Warsaw, and they were close to Poland, and in that museum was the artifacts. And so she said, "I'd like to get them back over to you, to your family." And I was delighted to hear that. And so we started talking through Zoom. I met her. I saw the artifacts, and I decided not to bring the artifacts home because they've been inside this glass case. And even though it was inside the glass case and very protected, there was no air inside, and so it rotted some of the feathers of our chief's headdress. And when she moved it, a part of it fell. And so I told her that it'd be best if they just kept it over there. However, the other parts, we would like to have them back. And so she agreed. And back to the flood 50 years ago. I had a grandfather that lived here. And at the same time, I had a cousin that passed away. And so we were worried about our grandfather. And this is what he said. He said, "I wasn't afraid." He said, "Because I have the blood of our uncle, the chief Black Bull." And he said, I was there. Even though I was afraid, he said, "You can hear the waters come. The water is rushing in. But he said, I prayed, he said, coming from a relative who was a leader. He said, so I decided, well, I have to lead our people. As I read a lot of the information regarding the flood, it talked about how people have survived. 238 people lost their lives here, and many of whom were Native Americans. And they lived along the banks of the Rapid Creek. Many of them were scared. I know they were scared. But they all held on. Because many of them are probably like us today. We want to be that strong and not afraid. Not afraid of what is to happen. I come from a family. My grandfather was a minister in an Episcopalian church. His name was Father Blackbull. And he used to tell us, if you have your faith, he said, that's going to save you. And so I thought, I had to put myself into the lives of these people, our people, your people. How do they do that? They must have had faith. They must have had faith enough so they knew what to do. I thought about that coming up. My daughter was talking about different things. I listened, but I also was thinking about how our people did. What did they do? I couldn't imagine. So I sat back. And back in the day, my cousin had just died right after the flood. And we had to come up here to get groceries and stuff like that for the wake and the funeral. So we got here about, I would say, 4 o'clock. And it was just it's a natural disaster. And we saw coming down what is now across from Kmart. The old Kmart was down below, it came down that hill, east-north. And we saw hands sticking out from under the rubble. And so my mother said, put out some food. Wo teta egna kape, wo ichakope. He said, feed the spirit. So we did. We put some food out. But these are some of the stuff that our people did. And we prayed. My grandfather prayed for everybody. He prayed for the spirits of those that have gone. He prayed for the children, young and old. And he said, these are all God's people. There is no color. Everybody was equal. We see nothing like that. And so that's what our grandpa always told us. We are all equal. And I know that in any natural disaster, it brings out the best or the worst in people. It always does. And so today, We remember. Wokiksia, remembrance of those that have gone. Children, I imagine that. This morning I watched the testimony hearing, the Senate hearing regarding shooting. They talked about children's lives, and I thought about the children's lives that had been lost here during the flood. Children that were here and were probably afraid. I don't know. But today's hearing, children were afraid, calling for help. And I know that people have called for help during the flood as well. I'm really sorry that I didn't introduce myself, but that's the bit, but I am a school teacher. I am a Lakota language teacher. I'm a Lakota language instructor. I am a consultant to South Dakota State University American Indian Studies and for the Humanities Department for SDSU. I just came back last week from Brookings. And in my presentation at SDSU, I talked about equality. I talked about perseverance. I talked about resiliency. And this is a good example of resiliency. Look at how beautiful Rapid City is now. Look at how much Rapid City has grown. People fixed up their homes, homes are being built. And more people are coming into Rapid City because they love Rapid City. In spite of what happened 50 years ago. Because we as Lakota believe that once we bury our loved ones into the ground, a new life comes up. So that's an example of what we saw here. The flood. Even though we have lost businesses, our lives especially, lives have been lost, but good have grown. And so I talked about resiliency in Brookings. I talked with many of the PhDs regarding this. And we had a roundtable discussion regarding this. And I told them, I don't know why. I talked about natural disaster, and then Mr. Kirkpatrick called me Monday, and he asked me if I would speak today. And I said, sure, what about? And then he told me, I said, oh, okay. I'd love to. So I have been teaching for over 43 years. Next year, I will retire. I've done a lot of presentations, but this is different. We are talking about lives that have been lost here. And how do we handle that? By people coming together as one. We have unity. We need to be together as one. And we need to start building each other up. You know, we were never taught that we were different until somebody told me that I was different color. My mother and I went to pick potatoes in the fall, so we went. And I went to school in a one-room schoolhouse in Hay Springs, Nebraska. And that's where I found out that I was brown. I had a friend. She was a farmer's daughter. So her and I played together. And she asked me, she said, "You are browner than me." And I said, "Yeah." And I said, "You know what? You drank too much white milk." And then she said, "And you must have drank a lot of chocolate milk." I said, "Yes, I did." So those things, you know, but I do have a lot of friends that I talked with regarding this flood, whose families were here. And we visited about them. After Mr. Kirkpatrick asked me, I started calling my friends that were here. And we started discussing what are some of the ways that people have bounced back. And we talked about that. Because she too works for Black Hills State University. So we talked about that. She had relatives that have lost their lives here. But nevertheless, we all learned. Everybody learned from that. We were taught to be humble. We were taught to understand. We also taught us life and the value of lives. That's why we're here. We valued the lives of the people that have gone. That's why we're here. The people that have gone on brought you here. And so I'm very thankful that we as people, we are one. We need to continue our faith. That in due time, we will be who we say we are, and we are Americans. We are Native Americans. I was told in Brookings, one of the professors were leaving. She was going to take a job at the University of Michigan. And she told me, she said, "I'd like to get you to come to the campus." And she said, "We want you to talk about resiliency." I talked about how we as Lakota women, we are the backbone of our nation. You picture a teepee, the poles, that's who we are. Right in the middle is our children. In the forefront is our men. That's how we are. And we go in one way, and we come out of our teepee the other way. That's who we are. We value our families, our Tioshpayas, the Oshpayas, and the Oyate. We speak about respect. That's why we're here. We are respecting the lives of those people that are gone. And so I am really very, very happy that I'm here. I have yet to talk to Brian. And then we're going to go on from there. But I always tease him. And I always tell him, well, that's how you men are. You let the women take over, and then you sit back and you can criticize. But thank you very much. And I am very happy to be here. I'm going to be doing a presentation at SDSU middle part of July. I think it's July 10th. I have to be up there. And I'm going to be talking regarding South Dakota history and its people. How far have we come? What did we do? What is our next 5 years? We can't say 10 years anymore because that's really long for some of us. So we're going to do a short-term goal and say 5 years. I say 3 years. So if you are in and around Brookings, come over. I think it's going to be on PBS, and so I am. So I'm very happy again to see all of you, and for those of your relatives that have been lost to the flood, my heart is with you and my thoughts are with you. So thank you very much. Ho wopulai echichapi mitakuyasi. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. Is there?
I'm sorry. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. Hello, my name is Bruce Lehman. My story of the flood is this. June 9th, 1972. This is going to lead into what was going on. My dad was an amateur radio operator. There was 40 people in the local Rhapsody area. It was called the Black Hills Amateur Radio Club. And the reason for that, okay, during the flood, when it hit, I lived on Central Boulevard, and I saw it before my own eyes. Okay, I'll talk about those stuff later, but where this leads into is, okay, my dad was on his mobile rig. He worked for Carter Elevator Company at the time, June 9th, 1972. And him and 40 other ham radio operators, they had what they call mobile rigs in order to collaborate the communication, because everybody knows when there's a disaster, you cannot stop the lines of communication. When the flood hit, we lost everything, electricity, and when you lose a phone, we didn't have cell phones in those days, but thank God for amateur radio, because that's what saved 20,000 missing persons list that they were tabulated in Rhapsody area. Okay, thank God for another thing. The National Guard, they were doing their training camp in Rhapsody at the area. Thank God for that, because what they did, they brought gasoline so my dad could operate his mobile ham radio rig. He had a van for Carter Elevator Company. Anyway, he was on the air, I don't know, 10 hours or something. Anyway, my job in this, and my mom, we would bring him coffee. So, because in order to do this, to tabulate 20,000 people missing persons list, you have to keep them awake, right? So I brought my dad coffee, and then my mother brought my dad coffee as well, so he could keep his mobile ham rig going for this 20,000 missing persons tabulation. Okay, my story of the flood is this. Okay, I survived it, and I thank God I did. The scariest part about the flood was this, okay? Every time the lightning struck, I saw a house floating down Jackson Boulevard, which is probably about a block and a half where I lived on Central Boulevard. In my backyard, we had what's called Jackson Pond. Well, there was cars in there. I remember it quite well. There were people screaming for help, and I wanted to help. I wanted to help, and what blew me away, I had to talk to a minister afterwards, because it tore my heart right out. I couldn't help those people that were screaming because I'm not that great of a swimmer. But anyway, when I saw the water when Canyon Lake Dam had burst because of the massive rainfall, I couldn't do anything about it, and I had to go see a minister about it and pray about it because it was I guess it would fall in the category of post-traumatic stress syndrome, because I remember the day after, my brother, he was in the Air Force at the time, and the media somehow got it distorted. They said on the news media, they had said that Rapid City was completely underwater and that Star Village was the only thing remaining. No, that was not true. Sometimes they get things mixed up. But my brother came to Rapid City after it all happened. He said, "What happened here? Did a bomb go off?" He saw the devastation. There was a street about 3 blocks away where I lived off of Central Boulevard called Dunbarton Street. It's no longer there. They did a piece on that. It was the Night of Terror on Dunbarton Street. It was written in Life magazine many years ago, or Post, one of the two. But anyway, I knew the families that lived on Dunbarton Street. The whole street was completely missing. Only thing left of it now is part of Meadowbrook Golf Course, which is an 18-hole golf course. But anyway, another story I have is I was out in it when it was raining. I never saw rain so hard in my whole life. I had a job the next day. My mom had woke me up and said, "Son, you're not going to go to work tomorrow." I worked for Star Village. There's a bad flood coming on. And what I also remember was the fact that after this is all over, my dad had got a letter of commendation. His call letters were WA0UN, his ham radio call sign. His name was Bill Lehman Jr. That was his job as a ham operator, to tabulate the missing person lists and other things too. They had so much they had to do, but 40 local hams, they all deserve a letter of accommodation because, like I said, they kept the lines of communication going. And this massive flood that happened, a very bad tragedy, they say it was one of the 5th worst floods of all time in the United States history. And I can take away a lot from this because we can become a better person because of it. And one thing we can learn about this, yes, they have a large floodplain in Rapid City, but also was the fact that people did not have flood insurance in those days, so they helped them. The government came by and gave us $100 million. A lot of people lost everything because no flood insurance, so thank God for the government at the time. They gave us a lot of money. And anyway, the city has changed so much, I don't even recognize it. But I just want to tell you, everybody that has come out for this 50th anniversary, thank you. God bless everybody.
Bruce, just a minute. Yes. I used to clean for Bruce's mom for years on the bottom of Central Boulevard. And my dad, when I was 12, over in Madison, South Dakota, him and Al Belk, they had ham radios. And I never knew it until I cleaned with your mom, but those guys had to be communicating, because I remember Dad and Al Belk all night for days on their hams in Madison, they had a list of the dead people and the people that were, anyway, they were trying to hook up, so I'm sure they hooked up with your dad.
Oh, you bet they did.
WB0YRI, I think was my dad.
Yeah, my dad was W0, and my brother was W0PBL. He wasn't there at the time, but my dad, thank God he had a mobile rig and getting the gasoline to keep it going. But I'll tell you, they did a fantastic job.
We just fed them coffee all night at home on their home rigs.
They had home rigs. They were able to. Oh,
Yeah.
that's awesome. Well, bless you. Well, thank you, everybody.
So again, everybody, we just encourage you to come on up and share your thoughts. Bruce, thank you for your time. And we talked about the Greenway. I mean, you guys, you may not realize there's close to 1,000 acres of park space now that has been dedicated through the central point of Rapid City. That's something that we could be really, really proud of. I know we have Mayor Barnett sitting there and Leonard Swanson, all those initiatives of not moving people back into floodplains were significant. And I know we've talked about in other programs, and we can touch on it lightly, is the SBA, the loans that came in to help people who lost their homes, the mortgages. Bruce touched on that in his conversation, but people didn't have anything, and so they did some creative financing to let people buy new properties and not be totally in debt and have lost everything. And that's a huge story. That's an economic driver. It also helped the businesses that were lost here in the communities, or businesses that were given small business loans. So, as we have this conversation, I just felt like I should insert a few of these other historical pieces. But I'll walk through And again, this is an opportunity to share thoughts that, this will not be the last year we remember what happened in 1972 at the Journey Museum and Learning Center as an example. So those stories that we need to know about keep coming out every time we have a program. Corey Christensen was just in here. She's been working in peer on research on this for 6 years. She's been a member of our team. The history is so big. It happened so fast. There's so many people that were impacted. It's not possible to consider that we think we have this all completely taken care of to the best of our ability yet. But we're going to keep working on it, and conversations like this help us. So if you guys wave at me, I'll come to you. I have a gentleman right in front of me, easy to find. Introduce yourself and share your thoughts.
Okay. Hello, everybody. My name's Phil Wendling, and I was 16 years old at the time of the flood. And Bruce, I think I went to school with you. Yeah. So my family, my father was a ministry at Zion Lutheran Church downtown here, and we lived over on Jane Drive, which was right across from Sioux Park, about 3 blocks east of Storybook Island. And I was 16, and I just started working at the McDonald's on West Main. And about 9 o'clock, my dad came into the McDonald's, told the manager, "I'm taking my son home because there's a big flood coming, and you better get this place closed and these kids out of here." And the manager did not listen, and he and 4 young teenagers spent the night on the roof of the McDonald's listening to all the carnage go by. And so when my dad picked me up, we went back past Sioux Baseball Stadium and across that bridge there by Storybook Island, and the water was just about up to the road there. And we lived on a cul-de-sac just across from Sioux Park at 2312 Jane Drive, which is no longer there. And but the whole cul-de-sac, we were all out front in the Lester's home on their yard, and we were watching the creek, as it was coming up. And back in those days, you had transistor radios. And so we had a transistor radio out there, and the whole cul-de-sac was listening to that radio trying to get information. And Mayor Barnett came on the radio. I don't know exactly what time, is somewhere close to 11, and said for anybody that lived in near the creek to get out, to evacuate. And so we all got ready and started making our way up to Jackson Boulevard to get to high ground. My dad gave me a rope, and he told me to tie that around your mother and your little brother, and you get them up to the Hoogtert's house, which was up on the hill above Jackson Boulevard. He wanted to go back and pull the breakers and grab something. And so when I left, I was wading out in chest-deep water on Jane Drive, and the next street over, it was waist-deep. Then I got to the 3rd street before Jackson Boulevard, and it was only ankle-deep when I stepped off the curb. And by the time we got across the street, it was waist-deep. The dam had broken about 5 minutes before that. So had we waited another 5 minutes, we would have got swept away. And my dad was able to join us and made it out all right. I had carried the dog, our dog Tina, in my arms, pulling my brother and my mother. And I like to think, and I believe, I never did talk to my dad about it, but I believe it was the first time in my life that he considered me a grown man, because, he put his wife and his little boy, his youngest son, into my care and trusted me to get him to safety. And we got up to the house there. We got up to the Hoogtert's house, and of course, they went to my dad's church, so they welcomed us right in. But then they were out in the road grabbing people, because there was a mass exodus of people going up their street trying to get to high ground and safety. And so that evening, there was probably about 40 people that slept on the floor in their house that they just took in. And the next morning, right before dawn, my dad and I got up, and we walked back down towards our home, and the water was still waist deep, and it was running really swiftly. And we looked over at our house and our garage and our cars, and the doors, and half the garage was gone. And then we looked on the roof, and we saw 2 men on top of our roof. And one of them was our neighbor, John. We didn't know he was home at the time, when everybody mass exited. And he and his friend finally decided they better get out of there, but they didn't leave until that big wall of water started coming through, and it slammed them into our chain link fence. They crawled along that fence, got around to the front of our home, broke out a window, walked through our house out to the garage. They got an axe and 2 large coolers for flotation devices. They got up on our Bronco, which was floating in the garage, and they got into the attic and chopped a hole through the roof and spent the night on the roof, saw our cars and everything take off, and listened to the concrete creak all night. Scared that at any moment the whole house was going to go. But they did have those flotation devices. So that's the things that happened. And let me tell you that we went and got a couple of National Guardsmen that had a boat, and they went over and rescued John and his friend. And there was just a spirit of community throughout the whole city. I mean, when we, everything that we had was gone. I put my leather jacket and my tennis rackets. I played high school tennis, and I put them on my bed on the mattress, and the mattress floated up in the water up to the ceiling, and so it saved my leather jacket and my tennis rackets. And that's what I had left from the flood, because the rest had swept away. It was muddy, ruined everything. We had to tear out all the sheetrock and the insulation, and luckily the church owned the house, and we had a lot of people that were skilled in construction. And so we tore out all that stuff. We had mud 4 feet deep in our crawl space that we had to hand bucket out. And we rebuilt that house. And our cars were gone. My dad had 2 insurance checks, and the cars were a little bit older, so it wasn't a lot of money. But there's a Ford dealer in Murdo, Dave Geisler. Told him to come down and pick out 2 new cars. And he took those 2 checks and told my dad that they were square. And so he got 2 brand new cars for the first time ever in his life. And then we, a week later, I was working at McDonald's again that night. My dad came in again, and for many of you may not know, but the next week there was another flood warning. And people took it very seriously. There were 2 people that drowned that next Saturday night. And my dad came in, told the manager he was taking me, and that manager didn't hesitate. They got everybody out of there. They didn't lock the doors. They didn't turn off the grills. They got out of there. And we went up to West Junior High and parked in front of West Junior High up on the hill. And then eventually, after enough time, they said that the warning, it was safe to go. And right across at that time, from West Junior High there was a fire station. And when we pulled out, we had moved into some people from my dad's church home. They were stuck up in the hills. They had a cabin, but they couldn't get across the creek because the bridge had been torn out. So they let us stay there and move in. And I took my leather jacket, my tennis rackets, and the few things that we had saved, and we moved into that home. Well, when we pulled out from West Junior High, the fire trucks were right in front of us. And everywhere we were going to turn, they turned. And when we got to the house that we just moved into that morning, it had got struck by lightning and burned. And so everything that we saved was lost the next week. And we moved into other people's homes and that went to my dad's church, and people were so gracious. We got all sorts of clothes and furniture and things donated to us from all around the country. More than we had to give some of ours away because they sent so much that we couldn't keep it all. And and then eventually you hear all the negative things about HUD nowadays after the hurricanes and things. I'm telling you, we loved HUD because they got us a trailer in no time. We moved the trailer into the church parking lot, and we moved in there. And the church was one of 26 homes in the whole city that had flood insurance. And at the time, it was $17,500 was the maximum. And so we got that maximum. And with all the donated labor from the church, all the electricians, plumbers, and carpenters and everything, we rebuilt the home for about half of that money. And then the church gave us the rest to buy furnishings. And so, it was amazing. I found my little brother's bike about 2 blocks down, and the handle was just sticking out of the mud. And we dug it out and cleaned it up. My brother got his bike back. So the community was just amazing. They helped us out. And then they made the floodplain. And I don't know if you know, but when they decided to do the floodplain, they would auction your house off. Ours was back in good shape, and they auctioned it off. And as owners, the church could either meet that high bid and move the house, or let whoever had the high bid move the house themselves. And so the church let them move the house and build a new parsonage up on Crestview Drive up by Stevens High School. And so, I'm just real grateful that, that we were spared any death. But I can tell you, in our cul-de-sac, when we went back, there were dead bodies in our cul-de-sac. And there were neighbors that were just lived up towards Storybook Island that had perished in the flood. So I'm real grateful that they're doing this, and I'll let somebody else share their time.
Thank you for sharing that story. That was incredible. I'm looking for hands. This is an opportunity for you to share in an audience where I would like to think we're creating a better community, as our gentleman here was talking about too. And that's part of our goal here. Again, on the education side of all of this is we'll use the motivation of tragedy to build a better community for tomorrow. Okay, I think that's the theme, is look forward to a better place to be. So does anybody else want to, I'm being motioned this way, is that a good thing? He's not raising his hand, he's got other people outing him. All right, who am I handing the microphone to?
Anybody like to buy a daughter-in-law real cheap?
Thank you for coming forward, even if you were voluntold.
Yes, yeah. Anybody that's been married knows how that works. Yeah, well, I'm one of the few natives in Rapid City. I was born and raised here. I'm 86 years old, and I don't find many people that I can say they're around. They say, oh, we lived here, 20 years, and I say, oh, whoopee, But during the flood, we lived on Lockwood, which is just off Jackson Central up on the thing, and we had a couple friends of ours and their 2 children were with us, McConaughey's, and just prior to the flood, when the rain was coming down and lightning going nuts, well, Kerman, Stan's wife, decided that we should go out and get his dog in the pickup, and he lived out in the valley. Out in the canyon, not the valley, but anyway, Stan and I went out there, and he was getting some stuff from the house, and I looked out, and he used to have a bomb shelter. He bought the place, but it had a bomb shelter in the back, and the lightning was flashing so bad, and I saw the lightning by the bomb shelter, and the water was just coming up to the bomb shelter. And I told Stan, we got to get out of here. And we got it in those rigs and his pickup in my car, and we took off and headed back to Lockwood, where we lived. And we turned on Central. The water was right up to the bumper. And later on, of course, after the flood, we go back, and his home was still there, but the mud was level with he had a full basement with a pool table and everything imaginable, and the mud was just level with the living room floor. And digging mud out of that thing, like people commented, with a bucket, that's how you do it. The only other way, and it took forever. But we were fortunate, like I say, where we lived, the flood didn't get to us, but we had numerous people that come up there and stayed with us and everything else. And my mother lived in a trailer. She was so proud she bought herself a new trailer. She lived by herself. And that's where the Civic Center is. And it took her and that trailer and everything, and they found her down towards New Underwood on the thing. So I lost my mother in that flood, so I have some memories of that. And of course, I was fortunate enough, my family and I were living where we were at, why we didn't get the water to us. But that was an interesting, scary evening to hear that thunder and the lightning and to see that rain come down. anyone that was here will recognize the fact that you can't believe it could rain that hard, but it did. So, but the good Lord is looking after me and my family, so we all survived aside from my mother, so thank you.
I think I had another gentleman on this side of the theater that was being voluntold, or this gentleman right here.
Hi, my name is Don Reed. I was a 15-year-old Central sophomore at the time. My father had just built a 150-spot mobile home park on the south side of St. Pat, where the Lombardi Industrial Park is now. You know, we were about an eighth mile from Rapid Creek, but more towards the valley side. And my dad at the time was on a fishing trip in Canada. My oldest brother was stationed at Fort Carson, Colorado. So it was me and my mom, my middle brother, and then both a friend of mine and a friend of my brother's. We decided to go out to Canyon Lake after about 7 or 8 o'clock and watch the paddle boats break free. There was about 20 paddle boats that they rented. It was docked by the old Canyon Lake Club. The docks broke away from the moorings, and we just kind of slowly walked across around the dam and wait till they got to the spillway, and they were gone in an instant. Well, that's cool, you know, and you know, we just had no idea of the consequences of this thing. And my middle brother and his friend decided to stay out there and watch stuff, and me and my other friend went back to our house. We lived in a house in the middle of the mobile home park. And me and my friend came back and got in the door. My mother was yelling help from the basement, and we had just an unfinished concrete basement. But her grandfather was a guy named John Brennan. He was one of the founders of Rapid City, so she had a lot of antiques and historic stuff in the basement. Water was just pouring through the window wells. Me and my friend just started squeegeeing water towards the floor drains, and there's nothing else we could do. We just kept doing that. About 10 o'clock, the phone rang, and I went upstairs, and it was a resident of the mobile home park, and his first words were, "Should we evacuate?" And here's this dumb 15-year-old kid. You want to have him make your life and death decisions for you? And I said, "Well, I don't know." And he says, "Well, you better make a decision soon, or you're going to be responsible for a lot of lives." And that just freaked me to the core. But I said, "Well, I just don't know," and went back to squeegeeing. And about 11 o'clock, the cops knocked on the door and said, "Get out of there." So me and my friend and my mom headed to my friend's house. And, you know, once again, I started to get a little scared as we drove away, but went to my friend's house, stayed overnight. His father was a mechanical engineer at Dunham Associates, and he took me back down the next morning, and we had lost about 10 trailers. I was spooked about the possibility of maybe finding a body or something, and I went back in the house, and among a lot of the other things in the basement was several deer and a couple mountain goat head mounts that my brother had taken. And I don't know why, but as I went up to the basement door, I just, like I said, I was just more spooked about possibly finding a body, and opened the door, and there's that mountain goat head floating right there. I didn't know if it was possible for a 15-year-old to have a heart attack, but that about happened. My middle brother came walking down the street about 1 o'clock in the afternoon with a trout about that long in his hand. My mother about killed him, but it was just one of those things. You know, I think, Don, we were a community of 25,000 then, 30? 40? Okay. Everybody knew somebody that perished. Personally, we had 2 real good friends who lost somebody. So, like I said, didn't have any harrowing stories. I probably had more of a typical story of a Rapid City resident. Thanks.
I don't know about that goat's head. I'm going to wander up towards the center here. Thank you for sharing today. Here you go.
I don't know if I can do this without crying. I wasn't planning to share today. I'm Elaine St. Pierre. My dad happened to be the chairman of the county commission at the time, but we were just an ordinary family that night. We went to the band concert. I'm sure people have mentioned already, there was a band festival that night. And they, during the middle of the concert, they told everyone if they lived near the creek, they should go home, which probably we would have been better if we had stayed at Stevens High School at the band concert. So we went home, and it was all of the rest of my siblings were out of the house or out of the town at that time, that night. So it was just my parents and myself and an elderly aunt and then her cousin that were there with us that night that had gone to the concert. So we were just visiting, listening to the warnings. We lived on West St. Anne in Argyle, about a block and a half from the creek. But our property was a little bit higher, so we weren't real concerned. But about 11 o'clock, I looked out the window, and I was just ready for bed, and I said, "Dad, there goes your pickup down the street." So at that point, he couldn't do anything but just say, "Well, I'll go down and get it in the morning." So at that point, my mom and my aunt went down to the basement. The basement windows had been open. And I remember going down the stairs into the basement and just seeing 2 waterfalls, a waterfall coming in each window of the water. And at that point, we realized we obviously couldn't, there was nothing we could do to save anything. So I think my mom made me put on some snow boots and a raincoat or something that was down in the basement. We all went upstairs, and Dad thought we should get on the roof. We lived in a corner lot, so there were 2 big windows on each side, and there were logs and cars coming down at that point, so he decided it was better not to get on the roof, because if something came through the window, the house would break up and we would be gone anyway. But while we were standing on our front porch, he thought we should go up the street. It was a higher elevation up the street, and then we'd be all right. So we were on the front porch, and a U-Haul trailer washed up against the front porch, so we couldn't get out the front way. So we went down, we had a split level home, and went down to my brother's bedroom, which was the next level down, and Dad wisely grabbed a bedspread and a sheet off my brother's bed, kicked out the window, and climbed out the back window. I climbed out after him, and the water was about up to my ankles. By the time the 3 ladies had gotten out, the water was up to my shoulders. I was 12. So he had us hang on to this bedspread and sheet so that we would all stay together. I insisted on giving him a dog. So Dad was holding the dog and trying to hold the bedspread with all of us together to head up the street. But at that point, the water was so swift and so deep that we couldn't get beyond the next door neighbor's yard. So there were some big poplar trees in the back of their yard and a big wooden fence. So he thought if we could climb up the fence and get up high enough in the poplar tree, we might be all right. So we put my dog in a little tree. And then we proceeded back to the fence and climbed up the fence into the tree. I was the youngest, so it was easier for me to climb up. and I heard my aunt screaming, and her foot had gotten caught in the fence as the fence was washing away. But just at the last second, her foot got out, otherwise she would have gone with the fence. So I was high in the tree, and then my dad was below me. And then my mom and the three ladies were hanging onto the branches in the lower part with their legs washed out from them. And so that's how we spent the night. Periodically, you couldn't see anything because obviously the electricity was out everywhere. So the only time you could see anything was when it was lightning. And you could just hear this constant roar of the water, the thunder. Sometimes there'd be explosions when you could tell that houses would go. And I remember feeling like I was the only person, like we were the only people left in the world. And I just called down to my dad and I said, "Dad, where is everybody?" And he said, "I'm sorry, Elaine, I don't know." So then throughout the rest of the night, I would just call down, "Dad, are you still there?" He'd say, "Yes." "Mom, are you still there?" "Yes." And I'd go through the list of the three ladies. And as it got later in the night, I would just say, "Dad, are you still there?" And he'd say, "Yes." And I'd say, "Is Mom still there?" And he would give an account that the rest were still there. So eventually, the neighbors came to check on their house, and my parents saw the flashlight, so they yelled, and they came and rescued us. By then, the water was down low enough that we could get out of the tree. And they took us into their house, and then they brought a pickup down and put us all in the back of the pickup and took us to somebody's house to spend the rest of the night. They put the ladies to bed because they were in shock. And when I remember standing on the porch trying to get off my little raincoat, and my pajamas underneath were just threads. The water was so swift that even that brief time we were in the water, it just ripped my clothes just to threads. So they gave me something to put on, and we spent the rest of the night there. My dad and Mom walked down to the house the next morning to see if it was still there, which thankfully it was. My dog was on the porch. We have no idea where she ended up, but somehow she made it back because nothing would have looked the same or smelled the same, and no one could survive in the water, so I don't know how she did. And then Dad, as soon as my brother, who had been out supposedly camping that night, came home, then there was a vehicle because all of our vehicles were gone. So Dad went down to the courthouse, and then we didn't really see him the rest of the summer because there was so much that they needed to be involved with. So fortunately, my aunt and uncle had a motel, so we were able to stay there for a couple weeks. And our neighborhood would go to the elementary school to eat our meals because there weren't grocery stores to buy food. And so it was just a sense, someone else mentioned, just the community of everybody working together. If somebody needed help, you helped them out. And I know when Don Barnett had spoken a couple of months ago, I just shared how much I know my dad respected the other people that were involved in all the planning project, that they worked together so well. They respected each other. There was no bickering. There was a job to be done, and they did it. And so anyway, that was my story.
Thank you for sharing. Over to your right, Johnny, wave your hand. That's Johnny Sunby. We are recording the conversations. Johnny and Seth Tupper, they're the folks working behind surviving the 72 flood. If you want to speak with Johnny, get him your name and phone number. Again, we're not going to pretend that all this history has been properly recorded and archived just yet. And so I appreciate Johnny and Seth's efforts, the efforts of what the Journey is doing here too. I have a gentleman coming forward. He's going to take the mic out of my hand here, so we're going to get it to him.
My name is Jay Harris, and I am a recently retired Baptist minister who in 1972 was here. I graduated from Douglas High School, and I was in college down in Oklahoma, but came back for the month of June to visit family and to work at the camera department at Kmart, where I'd worked through high school. And so I was only here for 1 month, but what a month. On that Friday evening, my best friend Kirkley and I went over to our friend's house from church, and their house was just located over Star Motel on the south side of that hill toward the higher area of town, needless to say. And it was raining like crazy. We had not seen rain like that ever. And yet we were in the house and we were enjoying and having great memories to share of each other and having a good supper. And every once in a while we'd check with the radio or the TV at what was happening with the rain. And we got ready to leave to go back to my house, which would have been right smack through the middle of the floodplain, when we looked outside and it was raining so hard we couldn't even step away from the porch without being completely soaked. It was raining so hard. So you know what you do when it's raining like that? You just say, well, we'll just wait until it lets off a little bit. And so we stepped back in the house and I called my mom and I said, we're going to stay a little bit longer, and we'll let you know what happens. Well, it wasn't very long before the power went out. We were in the dark, and we checked with the radios and everything, and there was no communication anywhere. The phones were out. And it wasn't very long on that part of town before the power came back on. And so we did some work in the basement to help get their sump pump working, because it was taking on some water. But it was an hour or so later, the rain had slowed down a whole lot, and Lou Alls, who was a retired major from the Air Force, said, let's go take a look and see if we can see what's going on. The only radio station we could get was Minneapolis, and there was nothing about anything that had happened in Rapid City. And so we got in his Bronco and we started down toward 8th Street and then down toward downtown. When we came over the rise in the hill there, the lights of the houses stopped where we were. All the power was out, and all we could see across downtown were fires. As the houses were broken loose, the gas lines were broken and they erupted into flame. And so we were just stunned. We drove down toward downtown, and we couldn't get very far because the water was just pouring down the street, too. And so we thought, well, what do we do? Let's go to the police station to see if we can help. So we drove back up and drove across, about the front of Central High over to 8th Street and cut across over there where the old Ford dealership was, where the police station was, right catty corner from the post office. And there was one light in there, so we went in, and there was one police officer who was in shock. And he had a Coleman lantern sitting there on the desk. And we came in and he said, Rapid City's gone. He said, there are bodies everywhere. And we said, what can we do to help? And he said, go down to the courthouse. That's where the command center is. So we left him and went over to the courthouse. And, whenever I've been a part of things like this and you say, how can I help? They say, we got it covered. No, they said, we need you. And so they gave us a radio, and they sent us over down toward South Campbell Street, just around the Family Thrift, the Taco Bell. Okay, folks from Rapid City know about Taco Bell. Over there, and had us patrol that area around the trailer park and so forth around there, just because you didn't have to go very close toward the state fairgrounds where the water was just flowing across Campbell Street. We even had to put a power pole across the road to keep people from trying to drive across the thing. They were going to wash away if they tried to do that. Well, before we went over there, they told us to come back to the command area at the courthouse by about 6 o'clock in the morning. So we were out there. We helped some people get into their mobile home after they identified themselves that was their mobile home, to get some prescription drugs out and so forth, and help them. And we patrolled the area to make sure there weren't any looters, and that we could, if anybody could help. When we got back over to the courthouse, because the two guys I was with were both Air Force. I was just a college kid, 20 years old. They asked about us, and so we gave them our information, and they said, okay, we need you to work with this team here. And as we were getting ready to do that, I went into the restroom, and in the restroom there was a young guard troop who was probably 2 years younger than I was, and he was in pieces. He was just emotionally shot. And the commander of the National Guard here came in and told him, he said, "Son, you've done a good job. You've done all that could be expected of you. Get on back to the post, and you get some rest, and we'll see if you can do some help later. But you shouldn't have had to go through all that you've been through this night." And I thought, oh my, and what am I getting ready to experience? When we went into the meeting, the fellow that was in charge was a Green Beret captain who had been working with the National Guard. And he said, "Guys, we've got the toughest job in town." The whole group in there were either Air Force, or they were police officers, firemen, or the National Guard. I was the only civilian in the group, but I was with two other guys that were Air Force, so they put me in with them too. And he said, we're the body recovery squad. And I thought, I think I want to do something else. But, you do what you have to do in a time like that, and you respond as you can. And so we went from there over to a little restaurant right next door to the courthouse area. And I've never seen a military captain just commandeer a restaurant. He said, "Here, we need a room for these people to eat, and you need to feed us." And they did, gladly, as you'd expect anyone in Rapid City to do. And they fed us. We immediately went from there to the fire station downtown and picked up ropes and shovels and stuff that's going to help us to do our job. We left from there, and as I try to remember, my wife and I have walked through the maps. I live in Arlington, Texas now, but my mother is still living in Rapid City, and she's in September going to be 101 years old. And I tried to get her to come today, but she said, "No, I'll let you do that." I think she's listening on my phone right here, right now, too. So, but she was 50 years old at the flood. And, anyway, we were looking at the map, and we left the fire station and came over to Omaha. And I don't know the directions from here, but just a few blocks from this location, off of Omaha and east, where the McKee Motors was. And we pulled up. We've seen those. I saw those cars all lined up that you've seen the pictures of, where they're leaned up against each other right there across the highway. I saw them at 2:00 in the morning that morning, with the train crossing guard leaning over to one side, dinging like crazy, and the water just flowing through there. But by the time we got out at about 6:30, 7 in the morning, the sun was coming up. It was a beautiful day that Saturday. It was a gorgeous day. But if you look down on the ground, it was horrific. We went over to the area just east of East Street, just north of Omaha, where there had been a row of houses along there. And that's where we started our work. And all the houses were frame houses that had basements. A lot of them were completely gone, and where the house had been, there were just a hole where the basement had been, and there were cars even down in the basement. I think there would have been a lot more deaths if there were, as far as in cars, if it had been at another time of the day. But it was about at midnight when that really hit through there. And so one of my jobs was to tie a rope around. They tied a rope around my waist, and I climbed out on cars. Then they handed me a shovel, and I broke the windshield out, and then reached down in there to see if I could find anyone. Praying the whole time. I didn't find anyone, and I did not, but that was not the results of our team's work. There was the first body we found was that of a college student who was in a basement apartment, and the people that had the house and had rented that to him said he never got out, and he was the first body we pulled out. We also pulled out senior adults, babies. Being in ministry, I see a lot of people in funerals, but this wasn't the way a body looks like in a funeral. When there's mud everywhere, there's distortion and twistedness and everything. We eventually moved from there down toward Bacon Park, still in Omaha, and we got there to where Mountain View tees into Omaha. And there was a Cadillac dealership there on the corner. The Rice Motors was on the other corner, and then that's the area where There used to be where Gary's Flowers was, you know, right there where the thing turned. And we had gotten reports that there were bodies there. And so we had a 3/4 ton truck, Army truck, that was running bodies to the morgue area as we retrieved them. And we pulled off there, and we had a number, because there had been so many houses right behind Bacon Park that had been washed out. A lot of the bodies ended up there in that area where we were. And while we were there, you know, several people have said about the good and the bad here that they've seen. We had some guys come up with their cameras and wanted to get pictures of something neat. And, you know, it was like, you know, I'm going to kill them, you know, just get out of here, guys. Now, it was wonderful to have police officers with us. They just got rid of them completely right then. But then a little bit later, a white Country Squire station wagon, you know, with the wood panel on the side, pulls up, backs up to us where we are, and two ladies got out and lowered that tailgate of that station wagon and said, "You guys get over here and get something to eat." And they had sandwiches and soft drinks and things for us, and we just did what they said, you know, wandered over there and let them take care of us. And I'm thinking, God bless these people. And, you know, you could have walked into any store in Rapid City at that time and said, "I need some food," and they'd have given it to you. That bridge right by the area going towards Chicago was damaged severely. It was angled at a very bad angle, and there was a guy trying to drive his car over that bridge. And one of the policemen that was with us got in front of him and said, "You're not going to try to drive across this bridge. It is dangerous. It's about to collapse." And the guy said, "No, I need to get over there." And he started to push the policeman with his car. And about that time, the policeman, of course, reached down like this and got a hold of the base of his revolver and looked at him, and he decided he did mean it. And so he backed off and left, and we were able to get a front loader to come along and pull a couple of those Cadillacs and block the street there so no one would try to go across the bridge. When we left from there, we went down just a few more blocks to the east to the area just north of the Landstrom's Black Hills Gold Place, about just across the street from where the food trucks, you know, parked there in the park there by the volleyball courts and stuff. On the south side of the street, there had been houses, and yet there was no flowing of Rapid Creek at that time, but there was water standing, and so we couldn't go out into this field and check the houses and the cars and things out there, so they got in a boat. Now, this is about 2 to 3 o'clock in the afternoon on the Saturday after the flood had happened that midnight. And the rest of us sat on the curb. So here I'm sitting with my buddies that I've, you know, from the National Guard, from the fire department, from the police department, from the Air Force, sitting there on the curb, while a few were out in a boat looking for any more bodies that should be out there. And we were looking down at a little fry, one of the little baby trout from the fish hatchery swam by, and a guy said, "My God, it's good to see something alive." And all of us did this. We went, and our commander realized we were useless at that point. He said, "Guys, other teams are coming in now, and they're able to relieve us. You guys have done an amazing job." I think we pulled out about 25 bodies. And he said, "You guys just need to go home. You guys need to go back to where you were and get some food and get some rest, and we'll take it from here. You've done good." So we were able to walk away from that. I would love to know if there were anybody that was on that same team. I'd love to see them again. We all went our ways. We were, you know, Air Force guys were living, you know, transferred someplace else. The Guard guys were from all over the state, and even one of my friends that I'm still in touch with has passed away since then, who was my age. And so, it was an experience that I have relived this week as we've looked at the experiences again. The rest of my summer, just let me give you that real quick. I was only here for 1 month because I was going to be working for 2 months, July and August, in a Christian youth camp in Oklahoma. And, you know, when something like this has happened, People want to know about it. If I had just walked out of Ukraine, you would want to know about what my experiences were back there, that happened just recently. And so every night for 4 weeks, I shared my experience at the flood, much of what I've shared with you today, with young people. And the message I wanted them to hear was that you are wonderful and valuable, and yet don't believe that you are indispensable, that you are invincible, because life is very fragile and it could end very quickly. None of us suspected what was going to happen that night, just hours before it happened. And so I challenged them, and I saw wonderful results from this, challenged them to not miss opportunities to live their life to the fullest, and to heal relationships, to love themselves, to love their family, to love their friends, their community, and to love their Lord, and to make those relationships right, because time was very, very fragile on our side. And I'm rejoicing to see the lives that were changed through that. Not that God would do something like cause a horrible experience like this flood so I'd have something neat to say at camp, not at all, but that he would use something even as horrific as this to do wonderful things in the lives of young people. I rejoiced in that. And so I rejoice with each of you in the way that our world responded to us in Rapid City and prayed for us and invested in us and really made things so much better than it could have been, because they were concerned too. And so we can rejoice in that too. So I appreciate each of you and appreciate the opportunity to share with you today.
Thank you for all you've done. So folks, this has just been a real robust success, and I want to thank everybody for their storytelling. I want to also say something, that is the Rapid City Public Library is continuing to gather these stories also.